Welcome back, DIYers. So what is a tip and a guard for your airless sprayer? Let's start with the guard. Guard is obviously used to hold the tip so you can spray. 2, determines the direction that you spray. And 3, funnels the paint down from the gun into a smaller orifice, which is your tip. Now let's talk about the parts of the tip here. And first is this nut here, which is used to attach to your gun. And all these tips, which I'll talk about in a minute, are 7/8 of an inch of a size that fits on the gun. The next thing are these fins, or the guard itself. And depending on the direction of these determines what your spray pattern is. So as it is oriented right here, and I'm showing you, with the fins pointed vertically, your spray pattern's horizontal. And when you turn this horizontal, it makes your spray pattern now vertical, and then anything in between. And the last part of the guard has to be the spray, the tip seat, which is this right here. And what this does is it directs the paint from the gun into here to the tip itself. Now, let's talk about the tip. Well, the tip is used for just what it is. Atomize the paint to spray whatever surface you are. As far as the parts of the tip, there's a front and a back. How do you know? Well, one way is this arrow, which is pointing to my right, which means that's the front, and the other side would be the back. The other way to tell is the orifice size. On the back side of the tip, the orifice is very big, whereas on the front side of the tip, you can see it's just a slit and it's real small. And that's how you get your spray pattern, depending on what size this is. Now, let's talk about compatibility. All I have here are Titan tips, but there's Bedford tips, there's Graco tips and guards, and Tritech tips and guards. So, as far as a standard Titan, I'm going to exclude this Control Max for right now, and I'll tell you why here in a second. All Titan tips and guards obviously go together, but all Titan, Tritech, and Bedford tips and guards are interchangeable. So if this was a Tritech tip, it would fit in this Titan guard. The exception is with Graco. There's a Graco Rack X tip, which is a blue tip. It only takes the Rack X tips, and none of these will fit in it. Whereas there's a Graco orange guard that's called a Graco 5, and that all these tips are interchangeable with. Now let's talk about this Control Max. The Control Max guard and tip are proprietary and only fit together with each other. As you can see here, this Titan standard tip does not fit in there and seat down into the slot. And the same thing goes for this Titan guard and this HEA Control Max tip. It doesn't fit down in there and seat. But the workaround is this Control Max guard is a 7/8 inch nut, and it does fit on my RX-80 gun. Now what I don't know is how it sprays, so stick around and we're going to try it out, because I've never tried it, so we're going to see if it works. And as far as guns, as far as the Titan, you get the RX-80, RX Pro, and there's an RX Apex, and that's really all I'm going to say about that. All right, third tip. Let's talk about what the numbers mean. Like this one has a 313 in it, this package says 208, and this one here has a 515 on it. So the first number, the 2, the 3, the 5, that has to do with the width of your spray. Now these tips come from a 1 up to an 8. Now all I have here ranges from 2 to 6. I don't have any of the 1s, 7s, or 8s, but they are listed on the Titan's website. So the first number in standard measurements, if you double that, that's the width of your spray. So like this 313, that means it's a 6-inch spray pattern. But that 6-inch spray pattern is when you're 12 inches away from the surface that you're painting. If you're closer than that, obviously you're going to have a narrow spray. If you're further than that, you're going to have a wider spray. But it's designed to spray at 12 inches, and that's going to design, that 3 is going to tell you what size pattern you have. Now for those who might be watching this that use metric, multiply that number by 4, and that gives you millimeters. So 3 would be at 12 millimeters, again, at the 12 inches. Now, let's talk about the last two numbers, the 15, the 08, the 19. That has to do with the orifice size on the tip itself and how much product or paint is coming through. So like in this tip here is a 208, whereas this tip here is a 211. So the 208 is going to have less product or paint coming through it versus the 211. And in this chart I'm showing you here, you can see like a 208 is 0.05 gallons per minute. Whereas when you get up to like this 619 I have, you're going to have over a gallon per minute of paint coming out. So that's quite a bit of paint. Okay, what I'm going to do now is demonstrate the spray pattern on the tip. So I've got a 215 in here, and as I said before, when the gun is 12 inches away, 12 inches, about 6 inches. The concentration of your spray though is within that 4. This is a 510 and a fine finish, and we can see what that looks like. Again at 12 inches. And in case you're wondering, this is just scrap paint that I had left over that I put in a can and mixed it all together, and this is the color it come out as. Should be 10 inches. And we're pretty close. What you also notice with this fine finish is the amount of spray that came out. This is a 10, a 510. See how much come out there versus, I'll get a production tip here. This is a 515. You can tell in slow motion there's quite a bit of difference in product there. So with your higher tip, you've got to spray a little faster. Now, I said I was going to try the HEA Control Max tip and guard on here and see how they perform, if it works or not. So here we go. This could be an epic failure. I learned something new today right along with you. So this happens to be a 517 tip that's on here. And I check, I got my little tip seat in there. Now with this, I've got to turn the pressure down. Remember these HEAs, they're a max at 1600. So I'm gonna go turn the pressure down. Let's see what happens. This may be a failure of all failures. What do you know? Works beautifully. How about that? Again, lower pressure than what those are. These are like 1600 max. So fourth, let's talk about the types or the kinds of tips. They make an SC6 Plus, they make a TR1, you know, and you have your HEA for the Control Max. So what does that mean? So let's start with the SC6 Plus. There was, I don't know if they make them anymore, an SC6 only, so obviously this was an upgrade of that. This tip is designed to be what they call a value tip, meaning you get a good product for a little less value. And so the SC6 Plus is that it has 22% wider spray pattern than the SC6 does. And it's rated at 5,000 PSI. Whereas your TR1, it's also rated at 5,000 PSI, but the TR1 tips are more of your premium tips. Both of them have long-lasting orifice, but the TR1 they talk about has a longer lasting wide spray pattern than others. And of course Titan boasts that all their orifices are long-lasting. So now let's talk about the fine finish, the SC6 Plus and the fine finish. And that's just what it is. The fine finish is designed to atomize your paint smaller and give you a nice spray pattern. And again, these are also rated at 5,000 PSI. Now, HEA. Titan makes HEA and a TR1 naturally fit this gun, along with the Control Max. But the HEA stands for High Efficiency Airless. And what these are designed for is to have less overspray. These run at a max of 1600 PSI. So they're designed to run at a much less pressure setting than these others, in which case they boast it's supposed to give you like 55% less overspray. And note, an HEA tip is not a fine finish tip. And like I already talked about, the Control Max is not interchangeable with the gun. So let's talk about a couple of tips that I don't have here. They make what they call a TR2, and all that has to do is with a twist of the tip, you can go from a narrow spray pattern to a wide spray pattern. They also make a TR1 high pressure, which is rated up to 7,000 PSI. So next, let's move on to pressure settings. Now on my Titan sprayer, I don't have a pressure gauge on it, but I kind of got this light indicator that gives you kind of a range. As you can see here, 0 to 200, you're going to get a flashing yellow light. Whereas 201 to 1900, you're going to get a solid yellow light. And anything above 1900, you're going to get a solid green light. And so kind of a general guideline for your production tips, and what I mean by production tips, I'm talking about your TR1s and your SC6 pluses, your pressure setting is going to be somewhere around 2000 to 2200. And the same will go for your fine finishes. But again, remember, it's going to depend on how thick of a product is that you're spraying. Now for your HEA tips, those you're going to have to decrease the pressure setting because again, remember, the max is 1600 on these HEA tips, but you're going to run somewhere around 800 to 1100, again, depending on how thick of a product that you're spraying in. And again, it's important to have your pressure settings correctly so that you don't have a lot of overspray and you get a good feathered edge as you're spraying. So now what I want to show you is this is still the 215. The pressure still at about 2500 PSI. What I've done is thin this down basically 50-50 with water. And what I'm going to show you is with that pressure that high, I'm going to probably have more runs faster than I would if it's a thicker product. I'm starting to get a few runs right there. There's a run right there coming across, and right there, and there's another run. So a thinner product like this, you can turn the pressure down. So I'm going to do that and we'll see the difference. So now I got the pressure somewhere around 1000, 1500, I'm guessing. No runs. So the pressure is also going to depend on the thickness or viscosity of the product you're using. So the fifth tip is which spray tip do you use to paint what? And this is going to vary depending on what you're painting, interior versus exterior, stucco versus, flat wall. And now I'm going to give you kind of some general guidelines, and these are kind of based on personal experience on what I use to paint my projects and things that I researched and found. So first, let's talk about trim, and let's talk about exterior trim. So with exterior trim, you're going to want to use your production tips. And when I say production tips, I'm talking about the TR1s or the SC6 pluses. And so for your exterior trim, like in my case, I used a 317. And the reason is my trim is only 4 inches wide. And in my case, my trim was a different color than the base of the house. And I didn't want a big 515 tip and have all that overspray spraying everywhere. So I went to a 317 tip to spray it, and it was textured, and that's why I kind of went to a 317. That'll vary a little bit. Let's say your trim is a stucco. Maybe you want to bump up to a 17 or even a 19 type tip because you're going to need all that extra product to get on the nooks and crannies of the stucco. Let's talk about interior trim. For interior trim, you're going to want to go to your fine finish tips. Again, your fine finish, if you remember, atomizes the paint to smaller particles. Again, you get a nicer finish. But you're going to want a fine finish tip. And probably your go-to tip will be a 310 for your standard baseboard and door molding. And standard being like the 3.5 inch molding. But say you've got big, wide, 6, 8 inch baseboards and door trim, you're probably going to want to step that up to a 5, say a 510, like fine finish like I have here, to get those completely sprayed. Another type of trim that you're going to probably want to vary the size of your tip would be crown molding. Now, if your crown molding is not very wide, 5 inches or so, you could get away with, say, the 310. But say your crown molding 6, 8 inches, well, you're going to have to step it up to 4 or 5, 10 type tip to get them covered. Next, let's go outside and talk about the body of your house. Regardless, you're going to want to use a production tip. But for me, it's going to depend on whether you have a smooth finish, like say T111, or in my case, lap siding, versus say stucco. So if you got like say a smooth surface or T111, You're going to want to use like a 515 tip, something that sprays a wide pattern, maybe even a 615 sprays a wide pattern and gets it done. Whereas in my case, I have lap siding, and my lap siding exposure is like 7 1/4 inches. And for that, I used a 415 because it gave me 8 inches, remember. But that way, one swipe covered the face, and then when I come back in my overlap, I tilted the gun and got the underneath side of the lap siding. And so I used a 4 versus a 5 because I didn't want that wide spray pattern. Versus somebody who might have stucco, you're going to step that up to say a 17 or even a 19, 5 or 6. Again, because stucco's got a lot of surfaces, you're going to need a lot of product to cover all of those. Next, let's go inside and talk about interior walls. Again, it's going to be based on what kind of walls you have. In my case, all my walls are textured. You might have what they call level 5 or just smooth walls, or just walls or nothing but just plain sheetrock, and that's it. And so in that case, if you have a smooth wall, you're probably going to use, again, you can use a production tip. You're probably going to use like a 515 or a 615, maybe a 17 tip, so you get it sprayed and get it covered and done. Or in my case, with texture, I don't have a real heavy texture, but I would probably start at least at a 515, probably go to a 517. Whereas if I had a real heavy texture, I might go up to a 519 or even a 619. Now, the size of the room, again, might change what tip you use. Let's say you got a small closet that's all your painting or bathroom. You might go to an HEA tip so that you reduce the overspray that you have in that small area. But again, the size is probably going to be about the same as the rest of the walls that you painted, in that it's going to be based on the surface. If you have a textured surface, you use a 515 versus a 17. Whereas if you have a smooth wall, you might go 515, 615, something like that. And last, let's talk about interior ceilings. For those, you want your HEA tips. And the reason is A, they run lower pressure, remember. B, they have less overspray. They talk about them having 55% less overspray. Because you're painting, remember, looking up. And the last thing you want is a bunch of overspray coming down and painting all over you. So you'll use your HEA. Again, depending on your surface, use a 15, maybe even a 13 if it's a smooth, 15, 17 versus a textured, again, a 5, maybe a 6 size tip. Tip number 6 is how do you unclog the tip when it doesn't work. See, as you see, no paint. This is how you unclog it. So assume that your tip is going in the right direction. Remember the little arrow, and you spray and nothing comes out. And the reason they call these reversible is you twist it that direction, give it a squirt, it's a straight line, turn it back, and you're back in business. That's how you unclog a tip. Okay, and tip number 7 is when you replace these tips. So kind of a general guideline, like this fine finish here, you'll want to replace it after probably about 20 gallons. Your standard type production tips, they'll last about 60 to 80 gallons, whereas your HEAs are probably going to be somewhere around there also because of the lower pressure setting. So some other things you kind of look out for as to when to change your tip would be the sound that it makes. A brand new tip, if you're spraying, listen to it, it'll have kind of a nice even shh spray. But as it gets more and more wore out, you'll start to hear a louder hissing noise out of your tip as you're spraying. The other thing you're going to notice when the tip's getting wore out is you're going to get a lot of fallout, meaning kind of overspray. You're going to get splatters from your project, meaning as the tip gets wore out, you're going to have bigger droplets of paint hitting your project, and they're going to bounce, if you will, or splatter back at you. There's another sign that you're going to have a wore out tip. Another one's going to be overspray. You start getting a lot more overspray, especially overspray on your guard, and then you're starting to start getting drips off your guard. Your tips wore out. That's why that's happening. Another big thing you'll notice is your spray pattern. On a brand new tip, you'll notice that your spray pattern is a nice long oval type pattern. As the tip gets more wore out, it becomes more of a circular pattern. And something you probably didn't think about, but like say this here is a 215. As the tip starts getting wore out, that becomes a 217, then a 219, a 221. So basically this spray, the tip inside here starts to get wore out and gets bigger and bigger. And again, that's where you're going to get your big droplets and your overspray and your splatter and everything from your wore out tip. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, I'll just use it till it just doesn't work anymore. And I guess that's okay if you don't mind having overspray all over you, or splatters, or a crummy looking paint surface. But the thing you need to really realize is how much paint you're wasting. You know, you might wind up wasting a gallon more paint a project just by a wore out tip. In this day and age, a good quality paint is 70, 80 bucks a gallon. So it's definitely worth buying a new tip that's, you know, $25 to $30. As far as overspray is going to be determined by the tip, whether it's brand new or wore out, and your pressure setting. So if you got a brand new tip and your pressure set too high, you're going to have a lot of overspray. Whereas on the other hand, if you've got the pressure setting where it should be for your specific tip and you're getting a lot of overspray, probably means your tip's wore out. So tip number 8 is how do you know when the pressure setting on your tip is just, or on your machine is right? Well, it depends on how it's spraying. So I've got the pressure set too low, and what should happen is you should see, instead of a nice fan pattern, you should see tails coming off, which tells you your pressure's too low. Another indication that your pressure's too low is if your tip keeps clogging. See how I have this long tail up here and nothing in between, and then right here means your pressure's not high enough. So now I'm going to turn the pressure up too high, and let's see what we got. And by the way, this is a 515 tip. Now when the pressure's too high, what you should see is a lot of overspray and a ton of product coming on and runs real easily. See how much product that was? And I actually had a little tail on there. And I know the pressure's too high because I saw the machine. So I'm gonna dial this down. It's a production tip, around 2,000, 2,500 roughly. And then we're gonna spray again. And that way you can see a nice even pattern. This is a 215. I'm using that so you can see the pattern better because I pretty much got my whole thing sprayed here. So this is the pressure turned down to roughly 2,000, 2,500, and you should see a nice even pattern. See, you got a nice even pattern, no tails. It's a nice fan pattern. That's what you want. And ninth, the bonus tip has to do with extensions. Now this happens to be a Graco. So what I could find is on the Titan extensions, they come in 6, 12, 18, and 24 inches. Whereas in the Graco extensions, they come 10, 15, 20, 30, and 40 inches. This happens to be a 10 inch. Now why do you want an extension? Well, extensions are nice to get you back away from your surface so you're not so close. Keeps you from getting a lot of overspray on you. 2, it's nice if you got something you need to spray up high. With the extension, you can reach it. And 3, with an extension, you can reach down without having to bend over so much. So I could reach to the bottom of here with just kind of a slight bend over, whereas without it, I'd have to bend down a whole bunch. Now they do make extensions with directional tips on them, and basically what it is it's a tip that swivels. So say you need to paint something up underneath, you can put that on, tilt it upwards, sit down there and just go like this, and it'll spray upward like you want it to. Now a couple tips or tricks about these extensions. When you put these extensions on, only put them hand tight. I made the mistake of using a wrench and now it leaks. So every time I use this, now I have to use a wrench to tighten it. But you only want to hand tighten it, otherwise you have the problem like I do. And then the other kind of big issue with extensions is what they call spits. Again, you only want to hand tighten your tip on the extension and the gun. So spits, what that means is the gun's under pressure as you're spraying all the way to the tip. When you let off the gun, the pressure stops at the gun, but there's still that buildup of pressure in the extension. And so it's going to keep spraying paint until that pressure is released. And so what happens is you'll let go of the gun, and as you're moving, you'll see it spit paint. So we're going to try and catch that. And you can see right there the little spits that you get. Well, there's your 8 tips on airless sprayer tips and guards that every DIYer needs to know in order to start your next painting project. And the best advice I can give you is don't be afraid, just go out and get started. That's what I did. And if you want to see more about airless sprayers, I got a playlist right here you can go click on and see other videos about airless sprayers. And until our next project, happy DIYing.